AMC. I've been an AMC member since '84, and most of my early hiking was up in the Whites at Cold River Camp, but I'm really excited now that I'm retired and able to do lots more with the DV chapter. My program tonight came about because of another DV member, Margaret Moore, who lives down in PA. She also hikes and cross-country skis with the Delaware Trail Club, and she sent me an email one day and said, "Hey, Holly, how would you like to go to Yellowstone in the winter, do some cross-country skiing?" I was like, yeah. It's something I've always wanted to do. I spent 4 summers while I was in college in the Tetons, just 30 miles south of Yellowstone. And sometimes on our days off, we'd grab a bike and go up to Yellowstone. So yeah, I was really excited to see it in winter, and it was everything I wanted and then some. So I hope I can live up to your introduction, Phil. That's a lot to handle here, but we'll give it a go, starting with seeing if I can share the correct screen here. And I'm hoping you can see the whole thing. Let's see. I'm going to share screen 2. Can you see the entire slide? Because on my screen, I don't see the entire thing. Share, there we go.
There you go.
Okay, now last time I was able to see it also here, because if I go straight to there, you will have notes, I think, right? Let's see.
There's no notes, just the slide.
On this one, well, let's see. I've lost it here. Let me go back to PowerPoint. Oh, okay. I see what happened, I think. I'm sorry, I'm not a tech wizard. Okay, here, this is what I want. Okay. And I think I'm now in slide mode, I hope.
It looks good, Holly.
I know, but it's not advancing. That's the thing that's getting me upset. Next slide, let's see. Why is it not? Here we go, show taskbar. It says end slideshow, but it's not. Oh, here we go. We'll go this way. Let's see. There we go. Yellowstone National Park. Why go to Yellowstone? Yellowstone was the first national park. Let me just change my view here because I'm covering my notes. I'm covering my cheat sheet. Here we go. Yellowstone was the first national park. It was created 150 years ago. So this was sort of a good year to go. On March 1st, 1872 by President Grant. And it encompasses 2.2 million acres, or about 3,500 square miles, and ranges in elevation from about 5,300 to about 11,000 feet. As I say, I used to visit it in the summers from Wyoming, and as far as I knew, Yellowstone was in Wyoming. And so when Margaret called me and said, "Hey, and we're flying into Bozeman," I'm like, "Why are we going into Montana?" Well, 3% of the park is in Montana and another 1% is in Idaho. I didn't realize that it encompassed 3 states. And it has more than half of the world's thermal features all in one place, about 10,000 in all. I'm going to try and limit the slides and not give you a picture of each of them. So with that, let's figure out why we want to go there in winter. Oops. Oh, okay. Let me talk about a little bit. I put this out of order a little bit, but here are the major thermal features that you'll see in the park. And they differ in 2 ways. One in particular, it's the aperture. How much water comes to the surface at any given time is the big one. So if we start with a hot spring, it's strictly the water that's the rainwater, the snowfall that's been heated under ground and rises up through the surface and comes to the surface just as a calm pool. If, as it's coming to the surface, you know, that area is restricted in any way, you get a geyser where the pressure builds and builds and builds, and all of a sudden the water comes spewing out. Then you also might have a mud pot Mud is formed when thermophiles, okay, there's your first big geek word, guys. They're microorganisms, thermo meaning heat, phile meaning liking. So they're heat liking microorganisms. Some, for example, use hydrogen sulfide for energy. They don't use oxygen as you and I do. And they can convert the hydrogen sulfide into sulfuric acid. And as the acid comes to the surface, it dissolves minerals in the rock, turning it to mud. And so you get kind of muddy water. And that's then your mud pot. And the mud is usually gray or black, whatever the surrounding stone is, especially gray or black if there's iron in it. If there's a lot of sulfur, it leans more towards yellow. And once a mud pot dries up, or mud pot dries up, you get a fumarole, which is basically a hole in the ground that steam comes out through. So those are the 4 types of features I'm going to talk about tonight. And now to why would you want to even go to Yellowstone to see this stuff in winter? This is an aerial photograph of the area in and around Yellowstone. Yellowstone, as I said, is huge, but this is a picture that was taken by the BBC. And in the upper left corner, you've got, sorry, go ahead. Someone question?
Fifth column.
Sorry?
Column box.
I'm not understanding. You've got Idaho in the upper left corner, and then you've got the Yellowstone the Yellowstone Park caldera, which is the leftover volcano. They're sort of to the right, and the Wind River Range in Wyoming going down sort of in a southeastwardly direction. And then you've got the Snake River Valley that curves around in this whole area, and it kind of bumps into Yellowstone National Park. So you've got moisture coming in from the Pacific down the Snake River Valley, hitting what is like a rain shadow when it hits the caldera, and it just dumps all this snow. So you have 10 to 20 feet of snow every winter in Yellowstone. The other reason you may want to come in winter is because in summer, just in a typical July, you have over 1 million visitors. But in the 4 months of winter, there's only 110,000 on average. So you only have 2.5% of the summer traffic in winter. So it's a lot calmer sort of place. So there you go. This is how the snow gets formed in there. It comes down that Snake River Valley, and there's so much snow up there, that they actually hire people to saw the snow off the roofs. The gentleman that took these pictures, John Henry, was actually a park ranger for many, many years, and he's part of this crew. And that block on the right-hand side weighs about 1,000 pounds. So you can imagine why it is they need to clean things off. So that's a little bit about Yellowstone itself. Now, what about our trip? Oops, excuse me. It was a 7-day trip, and in my case, bookended by snowstorms. I took off and I landed in Newark in the snow, but the time that we were out in Yellowstone was absolutely beautiful. I flew to Bozeman, and their Yellowstone Expeditions, which were the tour company that we worked with, picked all of us up, and they transferred us to West Yellowstone. The very first day, we took a snow coach tour of Yellowstone, visiting a couple of the different areas just to acclimatize to the elevation, because as I said, it's about 8,000 feet that we'll be skiing at. And then we spent 4 days and nights at the yurt camp. And then we went back to West Yellowstone and skied for a couple of days there before flying home from Bozeman. These were the folks I went with. Margaret Moore, who I mentioned, is in the green sweater. She handed that herself. And the other 3 in the picture, there's Olga in the white coat, and Deb in the blue, and Alex all the way to the right in the blue. And the only other person not in that picture is Lee Belcher, who's in the lower right there. So those are the folks I traveled with. So that's a little bit of the background. As I say, we worked with Yellowstone Expeditions, which is they're great. In the upper left corner, if you didn't believe me, they get snow. That's the parking lot outside of our hotel. And the first day, as we were in West Yellowstone, they picked us up in a snow coach, and this one we had tires on. It was like a van with these big monster tires, and we drove from West Yellowstone east towards Madison Junction. Madison Junction is where the confluence of three rivers, the Madison, the Gibbon, and the Firehole River all come together. Once we hit that junction, we went south towards Old Faithful. Now, as we traveled east along the river, these are a couple of the scenes of the river. The mountain on the picture on the right is National Park Mountain. It was one of the more prominent features along the river there. And as you go along the river, you begin to see some of the wildlife that is in Yellowstone, a lot of it. These are bison. Also, people will call them buffalo. The scientific term, or the common scientific name, is bison, but they became known as buffalo when the French explorers came through and started calling them boeuf. B-O-E, let's see if I can remember my French, B-O-E-U-F, boeuf, for large animal, also beef now. And they graze all the way through the winter on grasses, but to get to the grasses, they have to dig through the snow. And the way they do that is they put their snout into the snow and then shake their head back and forth. Well, you can imagine moving that amount of snow takes a lot of musculature. It's awfully hard to do. And so in the lower left, I've got a picture of a buffalo's cervical vertebra, and you'll see the sort of at an angle, there's a bone that comes off of the vertebra, I can't even think of the word right now, to which the muscles are attached. If you think of like the breastbone on a chicken, how when you sit a chicken on the table, you got that big bone that comes up that all the breast muscles, the flight muscles are attached to. It's a similar thing, except this is at the back of the neck. And you'll see a lot of the buffaloes with little white noses, like this little guy on the lower right. So I keep saying buffalo, I'm sorry, bison. Correct me, guys. And then we saw a fair amount of waterfowl as well. The white geese are trumpeter swans, actually. And they're the largest waterfowl in North America. They can weigh up to 120 pounds and have a 5-foot wingspan. When they mate for life, and they usually have a brood of about 5 to 6 little cygnets, little baby guys. And the cygnets stay with mom and dad for about a year. They're gray, as that one is in the upper right corner, until they're fully mature, and then they go off on their own. The other little flock of water critters I saw, I believe, are common goldeneye. Those are the ones in the lower right. But you will see a lot of the trumpeter swans. You'll see a lot of the bison in the park. Now you know we're getting towards a thermal area. How do you know that? All that steam. So where were we? We got to Fountain Paint Pots. And at Fountain Paint Pots, there's about a half-mile trail that we walked in to go around the area. In summer, that's a boardwalk. In winter, it's just a bunch of snow. And we passed first a series of dead lodgepole pine trees, also known as ghost trees. Those are the ones there you see in the picture on the right. They have succumbed to the environment, basically, in this particular case. We'll also discuss some others that are dead for other reasons. And as you go into the area, you'll see more of those ghost trees. And then you cross over the Firestone River. There's that bridge there in the on the right-hand side and get into the real thermal area where you'll see a series of geysers just going off at all times with names like Jelly and Spasm and Jet and Fountain and Twig. And those are the geysers we saw. And then you continue around a little further, and again, more geysers. And then eventually you get to an area that has some fumaroles. The one on the left is still steaming quite a bit. The one on the right, the water is all gone. And so now it's just this hole. So now you're going to begin to hear me talk about these fumaroles and geysers and mud pots and stuff. So that's why I gave you the kind of description at the beginning. If you have any questions, holler, please. In that area, we had, in the more quiescent area, there were two pools, Red Spouter and Leather Pool. Now, remember Leather Pool, it's this one here. Well, this is, I think, Red Spouter, and then in the background is Leather Pool. Which were created after an earthquake. I think it was a 7.5 magnitude earthquake in 1959. It was the Hebgen Lake earthquake. And these little guys were, well, they changed. One was formed, the other was changed by the earthquake. And this is the actual area called Fountain Paint Pots. Now, the thing that I thought was really cool, and I'm sorry, guys, I'm going to get geeky on you. You see the algae there, how green it is? It's like, wait a second, this is winter. Why is that so darn green? Well, it's because the days are so short in winter that the plants actually produce excess chlorophyll so that they can make the most of the decreased sunlight. And that's why they look so green in winter. Whereas, you know, our plants kind of look pretty, at least mine look pretty sick in winter. These actually rev up so to make use of the decreased sunlight. And this is Silex Pool. And in the lower right, I've got what they call a thermophile gradient. These are the different animals or microorganisms. Thermophiles, as I said before, are heat-loving bacteria that live at different temperatures. If it's incredibly hot, you get cyanobacteria that use nitrogen for energy instead of sulfur or oxygen. And that's that blue area in the pool. As you go towards the outside of the pool, where the water is cooler, the colors change because you've got different kinds of algae. And so, you know, as you get into the reds and browns, you get algae that survive at much cooler temperatures, like 122 degrees Fahrenheit, so like at boiling. So you heard me speak of in a previous slide of the leather pool. It was warm. It was about 143 degrees Fahrenheit and at that time it supported the leather brown bacteria. But after the earthquake, the water rose to boiling and killed all of those red brown bacteria. And then since that time, it's slowly cooled, and over time, the different bacteria have repopulated the pool. And so now it's back to that red-brown color. And that's the one takeaway in Yellowstone. Things are constantly changing. Okay, so then we get to the Upper Geyser Basin. And the Upper Geyser Basin is comprised of two areas. If you look at that map on in the middle of the slide, on the upper left-hand portion, it says Biscuit Basin. That's where we start to ski. And then we traveled across the road and then down the other side of the river, past several geysers, onto Geyser Hill, and eventually to Old Faithful. Nadia on the left side was our guide that day. And unfortunately, it was the only day we had her. She's amazingly well-versed in wildlife. And because of that, was snatched up by two BBC filmmakers, they were making a documentary on Yellowstone. And so she was like assigned to them for the remainder of the week that we were there, and then some, I'm sure. But we start in Biscuit Basin. Biscuit Basin was named Biscuit Basin because there were large biscuit-like rocks that were blown out of Sapphire Pool in that area during that violent 7.5 magnitude earthquake I mentioned in 1959. And the trail in Biscuit Basin, again, is about 1 kilometer, and it's a lollipop with a series of thermal features before we get into the Upper Geyser Basin. So that's a little background on that, but here we go skiing into Biscuit Basin. And as you can see, you know, there's some trails, I mean, other people have gone ahead, so we didn't do too much breaking of trail in this case. And we were set to explore all of this on our own. They left us alone, and all we were told was, be at Old Faithful at 1:30 to see the eruption. That was our only criterion that day. So here we are. There, again, some pools, and then the thermals around the river in the middle, and then more ice-coated trees next to the river on the right. And then we crossed the river and got to my favorite, or was my favorite, hole. And I was really disappointed. If you look in the lower right corner, that is what Morning Glory Pool looked like when I was last in Yellowstone. And people have thrown coins and cans and all sorts of metal into the pool, which has caused it to cool. And, you know, if you think back to what I showed you before, that thermophile gradient, then you see why that pool has gone to brown colors. Where was I, 24? Yeah. So that's kind of disappointing to me, but you see how, you know, man can also alter these features.
Holly, can I ask a question? This is so
Sure.
fascinating about the colors. Do they change in the hotter weather in summer, or do they not? Are not
Well, I
affected?
think the pool is relatively constant in temperature,
Mhm,
but if the pool water changes, they do change.
mhm.
So
Amazing.
in summer, I would, you know, perhaps you have more browns, but I've been there in summer and it looked just like what it looks like in the lower right corner. So the water stays pretty darn hot.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Jump in, anyone. I don't know if I can answer, but I'll give it a go. And then we get over to the geyser basin, the Upper Geyser Basin. And if I have these right, it's Artemisia is the one in the upper left, and below it is Giant Geyser, that I know. And then the one in the middle is Riverside Geyser, and the one on the right is Grotto Geyser. Now, the only one that kind of seemed like it might erupt was Riverside, and I was reading and it said if water is spewing over the top, and it was, and it's beginning, you know, steam is coming out, and it was, you've got about 10 minutes to an or 15 minutes to an eruption. And I'm like, oh wow, all right. And I started to stand there and I'm like, Holly, 15 minutes, you don't have that kind of time to spare, go. You know, because apparently when it goes, it really is amazing. And the, you know, it spews clear across the river. And so here we are at the river, getting close to Old Faithful. And we know then we're getting up into that last little loop. And this is what we saw. We're racing to meet our deadline, but we had to stop. We had to watch the series of geysers that I think are in the Lion group as they erupted. You know, we're all there. Oh my gosh, look at that, you know. And in fact, as we continued to ski around, we bumped into the guide who said, where were you guys? I was getting worried. I said, no, we're here, we're going to be there. And so we knew we were close, because we got to see, we saw in a distance the Old Faithful Inn, the very famous inn, and with the requisite bison in the foreground, of course. And then up on the ridge, do you see those trees, the kind of dead trees up on the ridge there? The guides were calling that, or Arden was calling that a porcupine ridge, because those are all the lodgepole pines that were killed in the fire that hit Yellowstone in, I think it's 1988. It burned through about 50% of the park. It burned over a million acres of the forest in Yellowstone. But we knew we were close, and sure enough, we got there, and wait a second, Old Faithful, which is the kind of gray in the foreground in both pictures, wasn't doing a darn thing. But that huge plume of steam in the distance, Riverside Geyser. So it did go off while I was there, but I wasn't able to see it go across the river. I just had to see it from a distance, but it's pretty spectacular, even from a distance. And we waited for Old Faithful, and we waited, and, you know, it kept teasing us, you know, with a couple little spurts, and finally it blew. And I was like, God, that wasn't nearly as high as it was when I was last year. And they said, how old were you? I said, I was an adult. And, you know, initially the guide was saying, no, no, no. And after we watched the eruption, we went into the visitor center and perused the gift shop. And then we ate our lunch in the snow coach. And we started back to West Yellowstone, and the guide told me, you know what, based on the time it'll erupt next time, you're right, it was a small eruption. And so I was like, oh, okay. It still was pretty spectacular to see. And then we got, as I say, back in the coach and started back to West Yellowstone. And we were going along the Firehole River, which they call the Plateau of Fire. And you could see, you know, like hot water spewing into the river, as you see there on the left side. And you can look across that plateau and see all the thermals in the distance. And then on the right is the Firehole Falls. We stopped at that on our way home. And that marked the end of our first day in the park. We then, you know, went to dinner in town. The next day, we again traveled west, but this time with all our gear. And we didn't turn south at Madison Junction. We just went straight through the junction and continued west along the Gibbon River towards Norris Basin, and then eventually what circled in the upper right there, Canyon Village. That's where we were going to spend the next 4 nights. We were picked up in a snow coach, but this time, as you can see, we have treads on the snow coach instead of tires. And that was another one of the 3 different configurations they had in snow coaches. You'll see the third, I believe, a little later on. And here are scenes along the Gibbon River. Again, you've got the river with the Gallatin Mountains in the background, sort of in the upper right. You've got some different kinds of waterfowl. These look like mallards. And then you've got the bison. Now, I've got a little red arrow next to that one bison on the right, and Margot probably knows what's coming next. But the joke out there is when you see a bison with his tail up, it means one of 2 things. It's either going to charge or discharge. That was what we were taught. And then we stopped at Gibbon Falls and at Beryl Spring. And it's called Beryl Spring because in the right light, apparently, it resembles beryl, which is a blue-green gem similar to emerald. I have a picture that I found online of what beryl looks like next to it. And again, we continued along the Gibbon, and you have, again, lodgepole pines, which are those very tall, thin trees there on the right, and then other pine trees. And then you've got thermals in the distance that you see as you go along. And again, you can see the damage that was done by the fire in 88. It was actually 6 uncontrolled fires throughout the park that created that damage. And now we go in, next stop was our Norris Geyser Basin. It's one of the most acidic areas in the park. So you're going to see a lot of gray and blue because it's also very hot. And we hiked an area called Porcelain Basin, which comprises the northern quarter of Norris Basin. But there are also 3 other sections. There's Black Basin and 100, or sorry, 2 others, 100 Springs Basin. But this is just a huge area. And it's also the most thermally active area of the park, where the mantle is the thinnest. And as we started our walk, we went past Porcelain Springs, which are the springs you can see there, again, blue in the upper right corner. And we went into an area that had small little geysers, steaming or spewing water sporadically. But the thing that I thought was most interesting about Norris were the ice formations. These are some. And you get what they call needle ice. It's where the steam comes up through the ground and freezes. And so you have these tiny columns of soil-capped ice which form. And they take all sorts of different shapes. You know, you see the one in the lower left that are just literally needles in the ice, just laying there. And then you get these structures. And as you walk through this stuff with your boots, you kind of crunch the stuff down. I feel guilty, you know, breaking all these little tiny ice needles. Then you have ice of all other forms in here. Like this, again, some needle ice on the left, and then needle ice in the middle that, like, they look like huge spider type things that all interconnect, or, you know, nervous networks or something like that. And then you got trees coated in ice. And then Holly's getting silly. That one looks like an outhouse to me on the left. A really nice one. I don't know if I want to sit there. And then needle ice in the middle of a little island there all by itself. And just as you saw before, you get mats of amazing algae that are bright, bright green because, again, of the excess or the additional chlorophyll that's produced in winter. And then after lunch, again, in the snow coach, we were on the road, and this time we're headed towards Canyon Village and the yurt camp. It's about 15 miles to Madison Junction, and then another 15 to yurt camp. And I show these pictures for a couple of reasons. On the left, you've got the Gallatin Mountains in the distance, and then you see the road surface. Yellowstone does not plow the road in winter. They groom it, just as you would groom a cross-country ski course. They wait until the road stays closed until they get just enough snow that they can groom it, and then they'll reopen it to traffic. And then in the lower picture, you get a much better view of the dead lodgepole pines and then the new growth coming up through the middle. And that's why I put that slide in there. But eventually we got to yurt camp in Canyon Village. You go past the ranger station there, and then you get into Yellowstone Expeditions area. And in the lower right corner there is the only picture I got where you could actually see Arden's face. He opened this in 1983. He together with Arden together with a gentleman by the name of Dale Fowler. But since 1989, it's been run by Arden and Erica Hutchinson, his partner. At any time, yurt camp will house 15 guests. You've got a couple of permanent yurts. They're in the upper right corner. They're, let's see, the kitchen yurt. One of them is about 20 feet in diameter. I believe the kitchen yurt is 20 feet in diameter. And then the dining area, which you can see by that covered portico there, or in the lower left, the doorways there, it's 24 feet around, or vice versa. I don't recall. I can go back to my previous slide and check my notes there. but you've got a fire pit that they would light at night, although to be honest with you, it was too cold. And this picture was taken our last night there. That's our amazing crew. Going left to right, there's Piper, who came in the very last day. So I only spoke with her at dinner and stuff. The cook, Connie Dover, who everyone calls Cookie, Nadia in the red hat, Julie Holtz, and then Aiden, who we skied with primarily, Julie and Aiden. As Nadia pointed out, Aiden's name is the reverse of her name. You know, it's a pair, called, come on, para, whatever. It's a flip. So those are the two permanent yurts. It's, oh, here we go. Yeah, I had it right. The kitchen is 20 feet and the lounge is 24. And what does the lounge look like? The dining room / lounge, this. And you've got a hot potbelly stove there that's going all the time with a bucket of hot water on it. And you get tea and coffee all day long. And you can eat family style. And just as you would at AMC August Camp, 8 o'clock is breakfast. And after breakfast, they lay out a lunch table and you pack your own lunch for the day and then come home in the evening to an amazing dinner. And where do you sleep? You sleep in yurtlets. They call them the yurtlets. These are dismantled every season. They have a canvas roof and they're really quite comfortable. They have either 2 twin beds or a king size bed in each. And they have propane heat. You can see the heater there and lights. And they have lots of hooks for you to hang up all your gear. And they've got a big, thick sleeping bag with a flannel liner, you know, like a bedroll. So we got almost, in fact, I did get too hot one night in there. There is a thermostat. You can vary the heat. And then the other thing that really, well, one that sort of surprised me on the left here is the washing or the toilet facilities. We had 2 composting toilets and a shower. And unlike August Camp, you don't have to bring your sun shower with you. They will heat up to 5 gallons of water for you. They were, you know, and I was not going to take a shower, but finally the last day I had to try it. Just as I had to try the sauna, which is what you see on the right-hand side there. And then the center is what it looks like inside. It is amazing. And that is taken out every year, but unlike the yurtlets, they take it out intact. They pick up the whole thing, put it on the back of a truck and drive it out, which just blew my mind when I heard that. So anyway, that's the camp where we spent 4 days. Any questions there? My only comment on the composting toilets is in each bathroom, they had about, I don't know, 4 or 5 different kinds of disinfectant spray. And I think they smelt so badly because when one person would walk in and spray A and the next person walked in and sprayed B, you know, you may have musk and lavender together or whatever. But it was pretty, that was the one time that was not, one thing that wasn't too cool. But hey, it was a toilet, who cares? No, not a tree. So the next day was our first ski out of the yurt camp. Or take it back. No, I take it back. Wrong. That evening, the first evening, we took a ski out to the north rim of the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone. And again, Nadia led us. We went from yurt camp. We were driven down the road there on the right. Let's see, the Canyon Rim Road. And we went to Grand View Point and Lookout Point and went to see the lower falls. And these are the views from there, of the canyon. At one point I'm looking at that ridge of the rock and I said, that is amazing yellow rock there. And someone said, yeah, Holly, Yellowstone. I was like, oh yeah, I'm sorry. And it's actually rhyolite. It's an igneous rock that was left behind by the volcano or was created by the volcano. But the canyon itself is about 800 to 1,200 feet deep and varies in width from 1,800 feet to almost a couple of miles, about 4,000 feet wide. It's about 24 miles long. So it's a huge canyon. And as you look down at the water, you can see all along the walls of the canyon where steam is still venting out from the canyon wall. So this is a very active area, both in terms of erosion of the water going through and then the steam vents and anything that they're doing there. And Margaret took this one picture. Our guide was teaching us how to take panoramic shots. And she took this one, which I think is absolutely phenomenal. It's the view from Grand View Point. And as you can tell, it was a pretty amazing view. So then we went to look at the lower falls. And these are the lower falls. Now, obviously, the two on the left are them in winter. And I'll be honest with you, as I looked at those falls, I was like, oh, that's not what I remember. It was like a really tall falls. They're like 308 feet tall. Why doesn't it look that way? And it's probably because there was so much darn ice built up around it. In spring, there's like 64,000 gallons per second of water that flow over those falls. So you can imagine, even in winter, there's a good bit of water there to ice up and block that up. And you can see in the middle picture a trail that leads down to the lower falls area. Now, the next day we did go out again, and this time we went on the south side of the canyon, and we started at Uncle Tom's Point. In fact, Uncle Tom's Cabin is what I think it used to be called last time I was there, and is actually named after Tom Richardson, who in 1903 built a quote unquote trail here for hikers to drop into the lower, into the canyon itself. And basically what it was a series of rope ladders that he kind of like slung over the top of the canyon, and you just kind of went down on the rope ladder. Now there's like a 300 plus step staircase that takes you to the base of the lower falls. We just walked to Canyon Overlook and then crossed the road on our skis, headed for Clear Lake. So if you look at the map on the left side, we started at Uncle Tom's Trail parking area, went out to the rim, and then crossed over to the Clear Lake Trail. When I was there with my kids years ago, this is a total side, but you see Lily Pad Lake? That one isn't a real popular, that's in a great little book about family hikes and trips in Grand Tetons and Yellowstone. That's a fun little trip. Come on. Okay, so this is our ski that day. And as you can see, it was, pretty windblown snow, but the day we were there was no wind. You can see the Gallatin Mountains in the distance, and again, the ice-covered trees. And we eventually hit a thermal area, the Forest Hot Springs. And this is where we jumped out of our skis. We took our skis off and then just walked through this area with our ski boots on. And in this area, you had all sorts of mud pots and fumaroles and more ice and snow. But the thing that I thought was really cool is, see that lower left there? That's a mud puddle with frozen mud. Those bubbles are frozen. And as before, you get needle ice and more frozen bubbles in the upper left, and those snow-capped rocks, which I love. They look like little mushrooms to me. And in the lower right was the snow cap. And the lower left, you see the yellow on the ground there? That's actually elemental sulfur that's come out of that fumarole. But it was even more exciting around the corner. Our guide pointed out a find that, she knew it was there. But this is a bison that didn't quite make it out of the thermal area. Either it was killed or it fell through, but there you can see the skull of the bison, some of the long bones, and some of its vertebrae, which we thought was pretty cool. And we skied around the lake and then had lunch. They had us lay our skis down, and we just sat on our skis and had lunch, and then we headed back. And on our way back, we stopped at Artist Point, which is another area on the other side to view the lower falls. And that's the view from there. And you can see on the right, you've got one happy camper, because that's the view I remember of the falls, which I think is just magnificent. So that's the lower falls from Artist Point. And that was the end of, was it? No, it wasn't the end of that day. Yes, we then drove out towards the Hayden Valley and along the Firehole River for a little bit to see what we could see. But basically it was just looking at the Gallatin Mountains and just the huge expanse there. We did see some bison, and lots of bison, but you see some in the upper left picture there. But I don't want to bore you with all the bison pictures I took. There will be some. So that was the end of day 2. Oh, and yeah, okay. I'll mention another. Day 3, we went into the Hayden Valley itself that you just saw pictures of. So we went from Canyon Village up towards the north there and headed south towards Hayden Valley. It's known for the bison that call it home. It's the only area in the US that bison have been found continuously since prehistoric times. Now, that's despite being almost hunted into extinction in the 1800s. Today, the Yellowstone herds number about 5,000. Bison is from Greek, and it means ox-like animal. And I told you that about bœuf coming from French, buffalo coming from French. But we got our skis on and started to ski into the valley there. And again, we started, I think that was our coldest day. But even then, I mean, I had my puffy on and I was cold and put a vest underneath my puffy. I started with a down parka and said, no, I'm going to leave this in the snow coach, and just took my puffy and had several layers on, and then put my vest on, and eventually even peeled my vest off, even though it was quite cold that day. And again, just more pictures in the area. And we were headed towards, again, another thermal area. You can see the steam rising there in the lower left corner. And as you learn from the other, the bison like these areas as well. And we saw one little guy there, the one I have pictured in the upper left. It's kind of heading towards the thermal area, but we thought, we'll have to see. You have to give them wide berth. You have to give them at least 25 yards when you come up with across any wildlife in the park. But you see fumaroles, and you see the beginnings of a thermal area. And as we approached that area, again, the one feature that we saw was an awful lot of ice. All sorts of different configurations of ice on the trees and around the mud pots. And then in that lower right corner, I thought it was really cool that you still see algae, though, growing middle of winter. And as we got to the actual, area where the snow has melted and it's a little warmer, our friend was there to greet us. And as I say, we couldn't go near him. And we had planned to walk across this thermal, apparently. That was the plan. But the guide said to us, well, let's just sit for a bit, have a snack and see what happens. Well, snack became lunch because the guy never moved. We weren't able to do what we wanted to do. But that's something you learn, dealing with the wildlife. We did go exploring a bit and found some wolf tracks, which you see in the lower left. And then after lunch, we headed back out, and some of us decided, they gave us the option of trying to do a downhill ski. And so some of us did, Alex, and I think definitely Margaret and Alex and I think Deb was the other one. And then as we got to our car, there was a raven sitting in the tree, and they were notorious for dive bombing us for our lunches whenever we stopped, whenever the snow coach stopped. And also just a wee bit down, found a gorgeous bald eagle just sitting there at the top of a snag. And I just had to throw that picture in because I think it's so cool. Further down the road, we came to a thermal area called Mud Volcano. And we took, again, about a 1 kilometer boardwalk around the area. The mud volcano was first described in 1870. I mean, I'd never heard of a mud volcano until I went to Wrangell, St. Elias, where there is a huge one up there in Alaska. And it looks just like a volcano, but all the sides of the volcano have mud, and it spews mud. It spits mud out. And this one was doing exactly that in 1870 when they found it. But then 2 years later, the whole thing blew apart and just left a big, large mud hole. And that's what's there today, is the remnants of that. That's the picture in the lower left. On the right is a feature called the Dragon's Mouth Spring. And it was named that in 1912. And up until about 30 years ago, it used to spew water clear across the boardwalk. And they'd come in like these wave-like splashes across the boardwalk. And as the water would come up through that hole, it would make this gurgling sound, this growling sound as it splashed against the walls of the area. And so that's why it became known as Dragon's Mouth Spring. At least that's the story they tell, the park tells. And then we headed back across the Hayden Valley, which is absolutely gorgeous. And as expected, we saw bison again. And this time I kept some in. There's a female with her calf and the herd. And the herd, they're smart. I mean, it's funny. You look at these mountainsides and you see them walking in single file. It's like, okay, it's your turn to break trail, guy. You go first, and one breaks trail and then they all follow along behind. Or they get smart and walk the road, as the one down below did. And it took us forever to get back because this little guy was in the middle of the road and he was not going to move. And you kept saying, come on, guy, he kept trying to get ahead of us, and was like, just get off the road, you'll be fine, but that kind of slowed us up. But in some ways just as well, because we got something we didn't expect, and that was a series of coyote. We saw a couple of coyotes and we were trying to figure out what they were doing. And there was one that was definitely eating something. And we went, wait a second. And we had seen a bunch of feathers along the river bank. And so we assumed they had killed one of the swans or a goose or something, and were then feasting on it. But it was really neat to see them. We just sat and watched them for a while. And this is where I'm going to get geeky on you guys. It hadn't occurred to me when I studied physiology, and I don't know if any of you out there have, and know what countercurrent heat exchange is, but I knew that Arctic birds had countercurrent heat exchange, and all of us have countercurrent exchange in our kidneys. That's how we, keep some of the ions in our body that we need. And it works the same way with temperature. If you look at this, and I chose to put it in here because this looks most like a wolf's paw. If the wolves or any of the ungulates or, any of these animals had veins and arteries configured as ours are, blood would come down the artery, and that's shown in red here, from the body at 37 degrees C and flow out to the extremities. And as it does, and it hits the cold air, and in this case, 5C, so still above freezing, the blood cools, and it continues to cool as it goes back into the body. And so what's happening is you're getting very cold blood returning to the heart, which A, isn't very good for the heart, and B, means you have to do an awful lot, or use an awful lot of energy to stay warm. So instead, what happens with counter current exchange, come on, hello, there it is. The vessels, instead of being far apart, are really close together, and heat flows from high temperature to lower temperature. So the heat from the arteries, as it flows down past the vein, transfers some of its heat into the vein. And as you go further along, there's the temperatures get colder and colder, but in the artery, but the blood returning from to the heart gets warmer and warmer. So by the time it hits the extremities, there isn't that huge differential. Like in the first picture, there's like a 19-degree differential between the body part and the environment, whereas in the second one, it's now dropped down 9 degrees to just a 10-degree differential. So it doesn't feel as cold, and the animal doesn't have to work as hard to stay warm. So I just thought I'd throw that in, because when I found out, it was like a duh, oh, of course, deer, yeah, that makes sense, or bison, walking chest deep in snow. This is how they keep their extremities warm or make it not feel as cold. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then as we returned to camp that night, we made an obligatory stop at the Chittenden Bridge. Margot, I don't know if you guys did this every night, but where those little red lines are, or arrows are, theoretically, are otter skid marks. This is where they slide into the river. So every night we had to stop and see if we could find an otter. And, after we did this a couple of times, I said to Aiden, or maybe it was Julie, I said, you know what, if there isn't an otter there tonight, you have to do the roller coaster with me. And she said, deal. And sure enough, there was no otter. And so after we got back to yurt camp, in the map there's a trail. It's only a 2.5-mile trail right from camp. And it's relatively flat. We went out and skied with Alex, the roller coaster. And it was really fun. There were no otters, but at least we had a little extra ski for the deal. So that's how we ended that day. And the following day, four of us. It was Alex, Margaret, and myself. And then there was, so it's 3 of us plus 2 guides. Julie and Aiden went to Washburn Hot Springs area and Dunraven Road. And the rest of the group went down to Cascade Lake, which is a sort of flatter ski closer to camp. They didn't even have to get into a snow coach to get there, whereas we did. But ours was a little more rigorous ski, and I was very happy for that, as was Margaret. We were looking for something a little more challenging, and we got a little more challenging. It was fun. As we got in there, you can see some of the thermal area in the distance. That's where we're headed. You see, and then on the right, I had to take this picture. I was told those are the Tetons you see there on the right. So you can see them from Yellowstone, and I have never seen that before. So if those are in fact the Tetons, yay. But our ski started with a 600-foot drop in elevation. So we started our ski by skiing big traverses down that big long hill on the left there. And then across an open area, a field, and then into the woods. And much of the rest of the time was breaking trail over and under and around logs and trees. It was really fun. we were much of the time in the woods. It was good. You know, we'd break out into a field periodically but then go back in. It was really neat. But eventually we got to the hot springs we were headed towards. And this one was mostly just some fumaroles and mud pots. This is Washburn Hot Spring. And, you know, again, I don't mean to bore you guys to tears with all these fumaroles. I apologize profusely, but they were really kind of neat. And we sat by them and had lunch and then entertained ourselves looking at some animal tracks, unlike any others that we had seen. I'm not sure what they are. And then after that, went down towards the thermal area a little bit, although I kept getting told, Holly, stay off the edge. And this is what was in there, all these different algae on the rocks, which I thought was pretty cool, and in the water there. And then we began our ski home. And on the way home, you know, you've got Gallatin Mountains on the lower left, and you've got huge valleys again, but then we've got that big steep hill up. And then Aiden there in the blue in the upper left gave us the choice. We could ride with her in the snow coach or ski home, and we opted to ski home. So we skied down it was mostly downhill, down the road all the way home. So that's the nice thing about them grooming the roads. You have some ski tracks anywhere you look. So that was our day that day. And our final day in camp, we went south for a little bit to Otter Creek. And then we headed back west through along the Gibbon River to Madison Junction, then out to West Yellowstone, past Virginia Cascade. And at Otter Creek, we again saw some coyotes, which was kind of cool. And then we put our skis on for our final ski, and lo and behold, there was another bison right off the trail. So again, we had to kind of give him some wide berth and continued our ski. And this one had a lot of uphill climbing to do, which we did do. And we were told, just don't worry, you can turn that corner. Well, we turned the corner, and guess who we saw? The guy from down below had decided to follow us. And I left the lower right, or the middle right, middle picture, bottom picture there, because from that shot, you can see just how deeply they have to dig to get at the grass, which I thought was kind of interesting. But you can see then once we were off the hill, we just skied flat out home. And then at Virginia Cascade, it was basically a 5-mile downhill ski along the Virginia Creek or Virginia Cascade. And up in the upper middle there, you see some more of that rhyolite volcanic rock that made up those. They used that to put walls around the road, or dug the road out between that. And then more views of the Gibbon River with, thermals along the river. And then we got to a thermal area. You see it in the distance there on this slide in the upper left. And I'm not sure which one that was called. But again, it was, I couldn't find the name in anyone's pictures. I couldn't find the name on the map. And I, even in my pictures, I thought I had taken more pictures of something other than ice formations, but I didn't. And I didn't here because this was, in my mind, kind of interesting. Arden told me, when you look, for example, at that lower left, the pine needles with the snow blown across it, to me, that always has meant that the wind would be coming from the right and blowing to the left. And Arden said, no, in this case, it's different here, where the snow builds up slowly on the needles and keeps building and building and building. And so it's actually blowing from the left and going to the right, the wind in that lower left picture, which I thought was kind of cool. And the same thing in that one that to me looks like a dinosaur head in the upper right. So this was the last thermal area. And as I said, everybody's pictures was all about the ice and snow, which seemed like a fitting way to end a winter trip to Yellowstone. So we headed back to West Yellowstone, and you knew you were in West Yellowstone because the bears weren't hibernating. This was at our hotel, and I thought it was so cool, that little bear. So that was the time in the park. But then we had 2 extra days. The first day we chose to go because it was a little bit colder, and you'll see in a second, it wasn't all that cold. It was only 18 degrees when we started. And we went to Rendezvous Ski Trails, ski area. And there we had to pay, I think it was $20, and these very well-groomed, and in my mind, too well-groomed trails. But there were lots of trails to choose from there, just tons and tons of trails. And we skied, well, most all of us, skied most everything there in the upper. We didn't do that, let me see, we may have done that lower loop, but myself and 2 others said, hey, that's it, we're headed home. And Alex and Margaret continued skiing for the rest of the day. And so that's one option right from West Yellowstone. You can just walk to it from downtown. The other option is the Riverside Trail. And, oh, and I'm sorry, I'm still there on the Rendezvous. They said there were going to be all these gorgeous views, but these are the only 2 views that I actually could see. The one on the left, I actually had to go off trail and into the woods to get that picture, and then only to find out it opened up a little bit further down. And the other big plus of this area is you've got this great warming hut that you can go in, and they have hot chocolate and stuff in some of them, not in this one, but they did have heat, and it was amazingly warm. People were peeling clothes off. So, and there's also a biathlon range there. So that was kind of interesting. But I found the next day's trip to be much more satisfying. This was the Riverside Trail, and the guides had mentioned it to us. Again, we could just walk to it. And as you can see from the map, there's like a line that goes almost horizontally across, a red line. That's what's pictured on the picture all the way to the right. You stay in between these trees. Deb and Alex actually had a coyote following them for a little bit, kind of curious as to what they were doing, which I thought was kind of cool. But Margaret and I started in on this, and then we had a big decision to make, because as you can see, it's like a big figure 8 with a big loop on top being the downstream, the downriver loop, and then the smaller one, the upriver loop. And we opted for the downriver loop first. Whoops, I went the wrong way there, sorry. Where you follow the Madison River. And this trail actually takes you back into Yellowstone, but there's no, ranger waiting there to check your pass as you go in. You just follow the Madison, and unfortunately it was a really foggy morning. That picture in the middle at the top, you can't even see the river. But slowly as the day progressed, the morning progressed, you got to see more and more of the river. And eventually when we cut over on that, we did the full top loop. And then when we cut over, you go up onto a ridge for a while. And there you begin to see views. And I love that picture of Margaret. As I said to her, you look just like the trees. Your hair has icicles in it and ice formations in it. But that was really neat. And then she dropped out to go back, and I decided to do the downstream, or excuse me, upriver loop as well. And Olga there in the white parka chose to join me for just a little bit of it. And I really, really enjoyed this. You were up high on a ridge for a bit, looking at the river, and then you drop down to river level. And you see that little house in the lower right picture. I skied right up to it, still, well, not right up to it. I got lazy after about 20 feet out and said, oh, okay, I'll figure out what it is another day, and kept going. But it was just absolutely gorgeous skiing. and the river views were just spectacular. And again, you can see in that lower right picture all of the lodgepole pine that were burned and are still not quite rejuvenated yet. And so I'm just going to end, because I was told a lot of the folks on tonight may be cross-country skiers. Just want to show you this. Even if you don't go into Yellowstone, there are 11 cross-country ski areas in the West Yellowstone area right from town. There were 3 that you could walk to. We walked to 2 of the 3. And all the ones I've highlighted in yellow are areas quite close to town, which if you have a car, you can go out and ski or hike. So it definitely was an amazing trip, well worth it. And I highly recommend it. The next day we headed home. Kind of sad there saying goodbye. But again, more of the lodgepole pines that were burned. Red, and I don't know, Margaret could tell you what the red vegetation is along the river and the mountains. And then the lower right is Big Sky, Montana, where we dropped Margaret off to do downhill skiing, and Alex and Deb were going to do some cross-country skiing in there. And then Olga and Lee and I returned to Bozeman to fly out the next day. So it really was a phenomenal trip. So I'll take any questions if anyone has any. I hope I haven't bored you to tears with all the fumaroles, but
Holly, it was a great presentation. I just want to put everybody's attention in the chat is a link to the Yellowstone Yurt Camp and Yellowstone Expeditions. And Margot Lacey also posted a really interesting recommendation for a book about the 1988 fires. So please.
Oh, really?
pay attention to
Cool.
that. Yeah.
Thanks, Margot. And Margot, add anything, please. She's much more experienced than I am. Tell them about the river.
Oh, I think that the big takeaway for me from the 3 times that I've been out there is that every time is different. And it's really predicated on the weather and how much snow there is and who else is out there. So when I went back this last time, I was a little worried because I thought, oh, am I going to be disappointed because I've always had such a good time. And once again, I had an even better time than the last time. So it's just, I haven't been back to Yellowstone in the summer since I went to Yellowstone in the winter for the first time 7 years ago.
And I spoke with Aiden the last night, and I said, Margaret and I were a little, gosh, it was phenomenal. And, like one night we were going to bed and Margaret said, I don't want to see another thermal area. And, I said, Margaret, you're in Yellowstone. I spoke with Aiden a little bit, and this was after the day that she took Alex and I and Margaret up to Washburn, because some of the group weren't going to be quite capable enough to do what we did, but they kind of get a feel for you. And Margot, correct me if I'm wrong, they kind of, the first time you're there, they kind of check you out and see how you were doing relative to what they thought you could do, or you thought you could do. And Aiden said to me, look, when you come back, don't worry, we'll take you out for the full day. And so that made me feel good. And I know, Margot, you said you've been out dawn to dusk there, right?
Yeah, the very last day that I was there, we actually skied 16 miles. But that was because we were a small group and everybody could ski pretty fast.
Mm-hmm.
But we went to the most amazing thermal area full of bones.
Oh, really? Where?
Yeah, it's a place called Glen Africa. But they
Glen
almost
Africa.
but they almost never take anybody there because the conditions have to be just right and you really have to be able to keep moving in order to get there and get back before dark.
No, I was just curious because I've got my big monster old USGS topo. I was going to look it up, see if I can find it.
Holly, we have a question in the chat about somebody wanted to know how the tour was organized, how are abilities determined, and how are the day's activities set or flexible?
Well, as Margot just said, in answer to your last question, the activities are flexible. And as you saw the last day, they kind of split us up. There was another group in camp. There was about 4 people that weren't real strong skiers, and Lee was having a tough time. I understand she's a strong skier normally, but this trip she was just not on her game. And so they split us up, and Deb and Lee and Olga went to Cascade Lake, where the 3 of us went to Washburn, which was a little more challenging, a little longer. So it's flexible. The other 2 questions were, how did we, sorry?
How are abilities determined?
Well, they kind of feel you out the first day. That's why I think everybody goes to the North Rim or the South Rim the first day, that first 30 minutes after you get into camp. You just hop back in, you put your skis on, and they just want to see if you know how to put your ski on. I had a long talk with Erica before I went about would my skis work or not, in this deep snow, and she very knowledgeable. She told me what some of these numbers on my skis meant, and she said, well, bring them out, we'll see if they work. If not, you can always rent. I said, okay, sounds like a plan. And so that was going to be some people rented, others didn't. And they just kind of feel you out to make sure. And as Margot was saying, it all depends on the whole group that's there. There was, as I said, another group of 4 that weren't really strong skiers. So they kind of held back on some stuff, I felt. But it was all interesting. It was, I thought very fascinating. And then in terms of how we organized it, Alex had talked about doing this 2 years ago, apparently, and had contacted them, got the information, and COVID hit. And then he said, I want to wash my hands of it. I'm done with organizing at this point. And Margaret said, look, I'll do it for you. And so she actually reached out to Yellowstone Expeditions and talked to Erica and set everything up. And she did the research and found out that for the 5 of us, it was just as expensive, or it was the same price to have Yellowstone Expeditions do everything, i.e. pick us up in Bozeman, drive us to West Yellowstone, drive us back, etc., versus us taking a private cab, that kind of thing. So those are the options you have. But they were wonderful in terms of, working through with us everything. And the very first day we had a bag lunch that they prepared for us, but they sent us a full, menu, if you will, and had us pick and choose what we'd have for our first day. Any other questions? Susan has kind enough to, I think, I haven't checked the chat box, but Sue, you said you were putting the 2 links in there. As you said, there's one to the Yellowstone Expeditions, which is the outfitter we use that runs the yurt camp. But the other is to an article that originally apparently appeared in the Washington Post. Now, when I went in to get it out of the Washington Post, I hit a paywall. And so I did a Google search and found what turns out to be the exact same article with a slightly different picture in a Spokane newspaper. And that's what I've sent, what I gave you. I don't know if you posted both links, but.
I just put the one that does not have the paywall in.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think the one in the Washington Post was February 25th or something of last year or whenever. Yeah. But no, definitely a well-run organization.
Well, Holly, thank you very much. You appreciate it. And yes, you did live up. And hopefully we have you again. And we will expect something very wonderful and mighty. So thank you. Thank you,
Phil. Thank you for the compliment.
Okay. And that brings us back again to say that in April, we are planning both a virtual meeting on Zoom as well as an in-person meeting at Ilex Mill. Do keep in mind, as of this point, masks will be optional. Do keep in close contact to notices on the website in case something changes. And in April, we have a real special treat. We're going to go on a bicycle and barge area, and that is from Amsterdam to Burgess, and that is with Bill and Lenny Steinmetz. And I see
wow.
Bill is putting up some wonderful pictures. And yeah, this is an exciting area too. So come back in April and you will see some trees that have leaves on them. So again, thank you for all of that. And yeah, the needle snow was really exciting, and seeing the bison there digging down through the snow too. So again, Holly, thank you. Thank you, Susan, for taking care of the questions as usual. And okay, see you in April.